Certain truths inflict more than just pain. They lacerate the very essence of one's being. These are the revelations that, once brought to light, offer no possibility of return, shattering the illusions nurtured since childhood, those you were taught to identify as love. Yet it is precisely these harsh realities that possess the power to wrench you from falsehood, to dismantle the enchantment that kept you navigating life in a semi-conscious state. Among all these truths, there is one that most men vehemently resist acknowledging. Women do not experience love in the same manner as men. They never have. Until this fundamental difference is grasped, you will remain ensnared in a cycle of unrequited devotion, naive idealization, and recurring heartache. Your suffering does not stem from her actions, but from your persistent adherence to a mental construct that was never genuine. The true source of anguish lies in the illusion, not the individual. What devastates you is the realization that what you perceived as a reciprocal connection was, in actuality, merely a projection of your own desires. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher often labeled a pessimist, was among the few who dared to articulate this truth with unvarnished directness. He dismantled the romantic ideal with a pen that never hesitated to offend. According to his view, what we commonly term romantic love is nothing more than a stratagem employed by the species, a carefully engineered mechanism designed to keep the man preoccupied, committed, and devoted, but never truly reciprocated in the way he earnestly hopes. What you might perceive as a soulmate, she might simply consider stability. What you envision as eternal, she might view as merely practical, and this is not due to malice, but because she is programmed just as you are, albeit with a different underlying rationale. This fundamental mismatch between your idealism and her biological imperatives is the very root of your suffering. This perspective is not about assigning blame or fostering hatred. It is about gaining clarity, about opening your eyes to a pattern that repeats itself in the lives of countless men who offered their all and received only silence. This silence was not because they were inadequate, but because they never comprehended the rules of the game. A game where you offer your soul expecting eternity, while she primarily responds to a silent, ancient, efficient impulse. And when that impulse ceases to be activated, your significance diminishes. Schopenhauer's pronouncements did not arise from bitterness, but from a clear-eyed understanding. What he discerned in the dynamic between men and women was a system of unconscious forces where romantic love serves as a mere decorative facade. Behind every promise of forever, behind every gesture you interpret as profound connection, a biological logic is at play, one that operates without seeking permission. This logic is cold, strategic, and functional. For her, love is not a sacred destination, but a means, an instrument of selection. While you believe you are enacting an epic tale of souls finding one another, she often, without conscious awareness, is evaluating whether you fulfill her current needs: status, security, provision, and protection. This evaluation is not driven by ill will, but by an inherent design. Her instinct is not calibrated to idealize, but to survive. And when someone appears who represents a more advantageous choice on that unspoken calculus, her body registers it before her conscious mind does. The emotional spark diminishes and you are left bewildered, believing love vanished inexplicably. But love, as you conceived it, was never truly there. That inexplicable disconnection, that sudden coldness whose origin eludes you, is not betrayal in the conventional sense. It is biological adaptation. It is evolution at work. You remain tethered to the narrative you were sold. If you love unconditionally, you will be loved in return. However, she does not respond to purity of heart. She responds to functionality. And if you cease to be useful within that emotional, economic, or social framework, you cease to be chosen, you cease to be needed. The error lies not in her for altering course, but in your failure to recognize that you were playing an emotional game governed by biological rules, for continuing to offer your entire being to a system that only required a portion of you for a finite duration. You placed your heart where mere presence was sufficient. You offered eternity where only a temporary advantage was sought. And while you persisted in believing the story, she was already directing her gaze toward a different future, not out of malice, but because her primal instinct had ceased to select you. Since our formative years, we have been instilled with a potent and perilous notion that finding the right woman would imbue our entire existence with purpose, that she would represent the final destination, the prize, the remedy for our solitude, the sanctuary where we could finally find respite from the world's demands. We were told that with profound love, unwavering loyalty, noble character, and persistent effort, we would be met with equally pure affection in return, that being good men was sufficient, that devotion was sacred, that sacrifice was love. But no one informed us that she wasn't envisioning the same ideal. No one cautioned us that her underlying rationale doesn't respond to romantic depth, but to instinctual necessity. While you were investing your being in constructing something everlasting, she might have merely been traversing a temporary passage. You laid the foundations of a grand castle in her honor, oblivious to the fact that she was only seeking temporary shelter. The complete devotion you offered wasn't perceived as an act of profoundness. It was often interpreted as a sign of vulnerability. This is because, to the female instinct, security is not found in unwavering devotion, but in demonstrable strength. Consequently, if your love causes you to lose your equilibrium, your personal power, and your self-respect, you become less appealing, less functional, and less essential. Men often operate under the belief that the more they give, the more they will be loved. However, they fail to recognize that unconditional giving frequently communicates a single detrimental message, that they are willing to abandon their own needs and boundaries. This, far from fostering connection, often breeds disinterest because, in this hidden game of biology and natural selection, value is not determined by the extent of your sacrifice, but by your capacity to lead without losing your sense of self, without resorting to subservience, without fading into the background. And when she departs, when silence replaces heartfelt promises, the man doesn't merely lose a partner, he loses a part of himself. This occurs because he has allowed that relationship to define his identity, because he has mistakenly believed his worth was contingent upon being chosen. But Schopenhauer articulated it with unflinching clarity. What you perceive as eternal love may, for her, be no more than a transient episode. You mistakenly attribute it to destiny, while for her it was merely a matter of circumstance. The most devastating realization is not the moment of her departure. It is when you stand before the mirror and acknowledge that everything you offered made no difference, that your messages, your gestures, your sacrifices did not hold the same significance for her. While you were diligently building an emotional sanctuary, she was unconsciously constructing a survival strategy. And that chasm of meaning is what shatters you, because you believed you both loved from the same place, from the same deep yearning for a transcendent connection. But no, you offered your soul. She evaluated conditions, and there you stand, broken, imploring your heart for something she had already resolved with her instinct. There is no turning back. No eloquent speech can reignite a flame that only burned because you served a purpose. When you are no longer useful, you are no longer desired. And while you desperately plead, she no longer feels the same way. While you replay cherished memories, she is already envisioning her next chapter. Her instinctive radar is not attuned to your understanding. It simply operates. And here comes the cruelest part. The more you plead, the more you diminish. The harder you strive to prove your worth, the less valuable you become in her eyes. This is because the man who offers everything without boundaries, without demands, without limits, ultimately becomes an emotionally disposable object, not necessarily through her conscious design, but because instinct does not reward powerless giving. It rewards dominance, direction, and self-control. When you lose yourself in the desperation to win her back, you forfeit the very quality that once made you valuable, your dignity. You become a mere echo of an illusion that never comprehended the terrain it was navigating. Schopenhauer offered us a stark warning. The man who places a woman at the center of his existence becomes a slave, not to her, but to the idealized image he projected onto her. And when that image shatters, there is no solid foundation left upon which to rebuild. Only ruins, only silence. However, within that devastation lies a potential for change, a door, and the key is not in her possession. It resides within you. The key is this realization: I allowed it, not as an act of self-blame, but as a starting point. If you permitted the idealization, the blind devotion, the self-neglect, then you also possess the capacity for your own rebuilding. You can cease your outward gaze towards her and commence an inward journey, not as a man who requires external love to feel whole, but as one who finally comprehends his inherent value, independent of any external affirmation. This does not necessitate becoming cold, resentful, or emotionally unavailable. It signifies awakening, seeing with clarity, understanding that a woman is neither an exalted being nor a malevolent force, but an individual operating with a different set of priorities, whose primary inclination is to select, evaluate, and progress based on the dictates of her biology, not your idealistic notions. Now, armed with this awareness, you have the power to choose with whom you share your energy, because you are no longer striving to be chosen. You are the one making the choices. When you cease idealizing, something far more potent than illusion emerges: clarity. This clarity reveals that your worth is not determined by the extent of your giving or the unconditional nature of your love, but by the unwavering loyalty you maintain towards yourself, even when confronted by desire. This clarity transforms you. It restores the dignity you had relinquished into her hands. You become selective not out of arrogance, but from a profound respect for your own being. Schopenhauer's intention was not to breed cynicism in men, but to liberate them from the suffering of playing a game with incomprehensible rules. He sought to awaken them to cease the pursuit of transcendence in others, a quality that can only be cultivated from within, to stop sacrificing their purpose for a promise that was never made from the same foundation. Because when the illusion fades, when the veil is lifted, something powerful is born. The man who does not implore for love, who does not beg to be seen, who does not trade his soul for meager scraps of affection. The man who chooses himself every single day. And that is the only man who is truly free.